past several years, not a day goes by where we don't hear something about the mortgage crisis or the housing crisis. In these uncertain times, there are many of us in this church tonight who scrimp and sacrifice, put a roof over our heads and food on the table. I recently heard from a family who invited me to join them for a mortgage burning ceremony to be held in a couple of weeks when they make their final house payment. They were understandably proud and relieved that they were now free from that debt burden. In this day and age, there isn't one of us in this church that hasn't had to deal with the issue of bankruptcy, either in our own lives or in the life of a family member or friend. I recently saw a family interviewed about their own bankruptcy. They spoke of the heart-wrenching struggle that affected them as they wrestled with this decision. This is not a family that lived extravagantly or beyond their means. This is a hard-working family where both the husband and wife have been unable to find gainful employment for the last 2 years. Even with the anxiety that accompanies a decision such as to declare bankruptcy, that family also expressed a sense of relief after they made their decision. Even though they knew it would ruin their credit and probably ruin their chances of ever owning a home again, they had the sense they could move on with their lives. Now they had a little stronger sense of security for them and for their children. It is heavenly when we pay off a debt, isn't it? It's an even greater grace when a debt of ours is forgiven. Just to put it into perspective, the debt that the first servant owed in the gospel story today was equivalent to all the taxes that Rome would accumulate from the province of Asia. That's what he owed. All the taxes that would be charged to the province of Asia at the time of Jesus. The debt of the other servant was about 1/3 of the average tax bill in the United States for the year. In today's gospel, Peter was pretty proud of himself. When speaking of forgiving another, he gave an answer that went beyond the religious prescriptions of the time. I must forgive someone 7 times. 7 is a perfect number. Peter is talking about forgiving perfectly. But Jesus challenged Peter. He challenges you and me tonight to go even further. Since there is no end to God's forgiveness of us, then we are to similarly forgive one another. That sounds nice. I don't know about you. For me, it seems almost impossible to do. Nevertheless, it's what God calls us to do. It's what we must do if we are to consider ourselves truly Christian. I recently heard someone who was interviewed at Ground Zero shortly after the attack of 9/11. His statement went something like this: "We can revel in that hate toward those who inflicted this horrible episode upon us and allow it to consume us. Or we can rebuild buildings, rebuild hope, rebuild dreams, and rebuild lives. If I am to live, I choose to do the latter." Another individual who was at that site on that fateful day said, "I will never recover emotionally, but I decided to make a better life, be more reflective, and live with more hope for me and my children." Well, we can and should be angry and even speak of the possibility of vengeance and retribution because of those awful events. The one who is Christ-like will not act on those thoughts and feelings. What separates us, the Christian, from a member of Al-Qaeda is that their acts of hate, retribution, and violence will never bring a sense of satisfaction or a better world order. At what what point does a member of Al-Qaeda say, "We have achieved our goal. Now is the time to live in peace"? That will never happen for them. But it must be the way for us, we who are Christian. Rather than focus on hate and retribution, we focus on the hope that only Christ gives by forgiving and loving as he forgives and loves us. And why do we live this way? Well, the second reading from Paul's letter to the Romans reminds us ever so clearly, we don't live for ourselves. That is, we don't live for our own desires, our own feelings, and by our own instincts. Rather, we live for Christ. If there is to be a better world, it can only come by following Christ closely. A priest chaplain who served at Ground Zero made these remarks recently about his experiences at Ground Zero a few days after 9/11. He said this: "In the days following the tragedy, some said they saw the face of the devil in the smoke at Ground Zero. Many asked me about the same, and my answer hasn't changed in 10 years. No, I did not see the devil's face at Ground Zero. I saw the face of God through the people working, caring, sweating, crying, rescuing, recovering, and being very spiritual in their own humanness. I was moved and changed and felt God's hand in the goodness that followed such a tragedy. My ministry embodied the prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace." As we recall the events that took place on 9/11 10 years ago today, may the words of Jesus which we heard in today's gospel be imprinted upon our hearts and undergird our every action. May God's unconditional mercy toward us move us to show the same mercy toward others, even our most hated enemies. And if we are still too wrong, still too angry to forgive, let us know that it is enough to simply pray for the grace to eventually live and forgive like Christ.